sure two packs. Break on one. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. All right, so let's do this a little bit quicker because a lot of people out there I know are familiar with Calvin. Some of them are not. But today, one of the sort of ongoing topics that Calvin and I end up. He's one of my friends who I talk on the phone fairly frequently. Yes, you heard me right, on the phone. And
Like
not
normal
text.
people.
Yes, from our era, the olden days. Um, and a lot of times Calvin and I we end up with all these topics that we end up nerding out on quite a bit. And one of them recently was how certain firearms did or did not work in the cold when you went to Finnish Brutality. So in part of this conversation, we thought, hey, this would be a fun topic to sort of bring to everybody out there in the inter highways, and perhaps we could have a fun conversation on this with images and artifacts from the Great White North, not Canada. And so, anyways, Calvin, could you tell us a little bit about your background, because you are not a novice shooter? I know you like to be humble about things, but I think you are a very proficient shot. But people keep on calling you an airsofter for some reason.
Yes, I don't know where that comes from, but I probably do know where it comes from. So I shoot. I've been shooting competitively since, we count all shooting competitions since high school. So I started in 3-position air rifle, small bore, 10-meter small bore, and from there just went on to a bunch of different shooting sports and found action shooting, and that's kind of my home, I guess, is USPSA.
And are you a master or a GM?
I'm a master. I'm a master in open production and carry optics.
And what that means is Calvin spends a lot of time behind pistols, a lot of time. And so one of the things, and Calvin just doesn't just compete. Under his channel Firepower United, he's formerly known as a different pseudonym. I don't know if you want to bring that pseudonym up. And definitely,
yeah, that's all fun.
Yeah, Phuc Long is definitely a champion of the Vietnamese community, and everybody in the Vietnamese community loved that image. But part of it, by Calvin's channel oftentimes portrayed Phuc Long, which was a jovial Vietnamese man who who had some interesting satire on firearms, and people frequently got very upset. Now, well, Phuc Long is not always here with us anymore. The satire still stays, and Calvin still generates a lot of satire under the channel Firepower United. So, quick welcome to the show, Calvin, and certainly, hopefully, not the last. I don't think it would be the last unless people throw tomatoes through the screen. But today, as those who are joining us on a more visual side can see, that we have a screen with Calvin holding a Kalashnikov, although you weren't using a Kalashnikov during the event. You see Mike Bloke on the range on the right, a mutual friend of ours with his trusty SA-80. How did that do in the cold, indeed? And in the background, I think I see, is that Ivan in the very back?
Yes,
very far, and then
AKA Kit Badger, for those of you who don't know.
Yeah, and then we've got Psyop Luhan right behind you. So, I wanted to start this off in talking about. Well, we are going to talk about what works in Hoth. Hoth, if you don't know it, is the cold planet in a galaxy near us. But this Hoth we're talking about is Finnish Brutality. An interesting thing to start with. I had some Norwegian friends. Actually, one of our Discord patrons who is from Norway, who is commenting on, "Oh, that doesn't look too cold." So we'll carry on that debate. But what is Finnish brutality? What do you do in Finnish brutality? And specifically, you went to winter brutality, right?
Yes, so this year in 2025, they decided to host a winter brutality. So brutality is a shooting competition where it bridges between shooting skills and also like physicality. So there's a lot historically, there's a lot of carrying heavy things, moving them from place to place, like sandbags. You would carry or a dummy that weighed, I don't know, 100 something pounds, and you'd have to carry it from one position to another and then shoot and then carry him to safety. There's also like some application of tourniquets on certain stages where they'll have like a dummy that bleeds out. So it's not a pure shooting competition like you would find in IPSC, USPSA, or 3-gun. There's a lot of other tasks that have, I guess, if you were wanting to prepare for maybe some military exercises, there's some of that influence there as well.
So it's kind of like an obstacle course plus a military skills course plus a physical challenge plus a small sliver of shooting.
Yeah, the shooting actually has gotten more difficult each time.
Okay.
And that might be partly my fault because I keep on saying it's too easy, and now it's gotten to the point where it's gotten quite hard. So
Interesting.
But yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I'd like to delve into that as we get into the topic a little more. Finnish brutality. If we go back to what Varus Staleka has been doing, there has been no shortage of coverage on Finnish brutality. If you were to look up any type of Finnish brutality footage between forgotten weapons and Bloke on the Range, I think you could find a fair amount of coverage on it. But
and Polinar as well. Polinar
and
Tactical,
Polinar.
they've
Yeah,
released
that's right.
full videos.
And so,
And they post their
anyways,
own.
I think one of Lynx Brutality. That's right. So those
Yes.
are the two major European ones. But I think one of the biggest interesting things for us, and have you lived anywhere that is like freezing cold before?
The closest I would have lived to freezing cold would have been central Indiana, which
So
gets cold, but
I mean,
not like this.
yeah. Okay. So that's North American cold though. So it's different from
Right.
the Arctic Circle cold.
Well, we were, at least for Finnish brutality, we were nowhere near the Arctic Circle. We
Okay.
still had a good 8 hours of driving before we reached the Arctic Circle.
That's a lot closer than Texas, I would say.
By far.
So one thing about so Josh and I, we live in Texas. Josh specifically, I wanted to see if he could come on the show today, but he was a little tied up with some inventory stuff. So Josh is a northerner, but as he would say, he's lost all his northern blood after coming down and settling in Texas for more than a decade at this point. But we'll talk about skiing in a bit. He's actually a pretty decent skier. And I would say, watching what you guys are doing, you guys have probably been doing more shooting than I have, being stationed in Germany, or, I mean, especially Germany is not like Finland. Germany is just like wet cold all the time. Or even in Afghanistan. It wasn't, when I was in Afghanistan, I mean, if we were doing Finnish brutality style of combat all the time, the US military would be like in a lot of trouble. But clearly we were not like buddy carrying people off the battlefield all the time when I was there. It was post-surge. It was definitely a lot more chill. I mean, you still got hit, but it wasn't like ruck for a long time and then a massive engagement. I was not SF, so
yeah, that's some of the things the Finns do on skis is unreal. I watched another survival video that the same trainer we had worked with some other guys, and they literally do obstacle courses with skis on. literal obstacle courses.
I mean, was it during the Winter War? That was one of the major delineations between the Finns and the Russians and even Swedish volunteers. Like there were a lot of Swedes, or especially Brits. You remember there were a lot of Brits who volunteered for to go to Finland in the
No,
early
I
days
wasn't
of the
aware of
Winter
that.
War. Yeah, and they showed up and they couldn't ski, and the Finns were like, "What do we do with you?" So that would be all of you guys showing up to Finnish Brutality and going like, "We can't ski."
Yeah.
But skiing is definitely a skill that it's a skill that you really need to have years upon years of practice. Like recreational practice is the best way for getting good at skiing. It's a lot like shooting, where if you start people on shooting young, they get the fundamentals to it correctly, and it's just intuitive. Skiing, I think, is the same way. There's been a couple times I've been very embarrassingly finding myself on like a German ski slope with some like 5-year-old swishing by me, and there I am, rickety, and then doing yard sales. Yard sales when you trip and fall over and everything falls onto the ground. And yeah, some like 5-6-year-old, little German girl like skis by you, looking at you, and then go like, just, and then they carry on.
Yeah, so one thing that's interesting about the skiing, you know how in a lot of shooting competitions, if you have to do like any major movement that could be risky, they have you unload the rifle and then do the movement.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at Winter Brutality, we skied with loaded rifles. And I told Yari, the CEO of Barcelona, I was like, hey man, I think that might be a little bit of a safety concern. There's a lot of us like who don't know what the hell we're doing. He's like, in Finland, everybody skis with loaded rifles. It's like it's just normal. Like they go through their school system, the public school system, and they learn how to
Mm-hmm.
ski there. And that's apparently common with the Nordics, and so which makes sense.
I will add to this, so like because a lot of times we build up the Finnish brutality and what we see out there. The Finns are like these superheroes, but like as soon as you take the Finns out into the subtropics and they get
Oh yeah.
into any type of heat, let's say like 80 degrees outside in Texas right now, 80 degrees Fahrenheit is I think like 25 Celsius, 20, 28,
I don't
27.
know.
Um,
Yeah, slightly above room temperature.
as soon as you get any type of sunlight around, the fins just all start to melt.
I mean,
So
we have a mutual friend who competes a lot, and she went to a major match in Poland where it got to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and apparently the Finnish team was dying.
so right, so a lot of the training, let's put into perspective, is very dependent on the conditions you're putting the athlete in. And so specifically Winter Brutality, people like us showing up, people who have lived in warmer climates, going to places like this, certainly that is going to be a disadvantage. But the interesting thing here is we get to learn about what works and what doesn't work that we don't usually see in a warmer climate, right? So let's say today for the agenda, we're going to go through rifles first. So we'll talk about some of the rifles that work, some of them that did not work. You specifically wanted to talk about the winter trigger guards and the modification culture between the US and Europeans. We
Yeah.
wanted to talk about striker fire pistols. I found out afterwards through the chat that turns out striker fired pistols have been covered by Forgotten Weapons at one point. But this is, I still want to draw from you from what you saw and kind of what we've talked about, offline as well. We want to talk about munitions and magazines, lubrication. That's going to be a big one, I think, and best practices. Just for audience out there, if you ever find yourself in, let's say, I don't know, Alaska in the U.S., it's got climates like that. So, actually, look at this. Some spots in
There we go.
Alaska can give it a run for its money. Not a lot of population in those regions, though. That being said, it was still negative 45 in Anchorage. I've never gone down at a negative 45. Negative 25, negative 28 is the lowest I've ever experienced. So
Yeah, I will say we had it easy. They had a very mild winter this year while we were there, and the coldest it got was like 0 Fahrenheit for the match.
that's great.
Yeah, that's the the mild winter. Like 0 Fahrenheit here is like unheard of, in in or at least where we live.
So, we're good with this agenda. Everybody out there, give us a thumbs up. Yes, they all gave us a thumbs up. I saw it. All right, so Finnish Brutality 2025. Here are some of these are just some images that we were supposed to talk about. Here, we're supposed to talk about the agenda at the very beginning. But we see an SG 550 or a PE 90. Is it a PE 90 that Fab brought right there?
I can't remember if Fab brought a PE or an actual SG 550.
It is the Swiss version of a long stroke 2-lug rotating bolt system. I'll let you guess what the system that
on
is.
A stamped receiver.
Yes. It is not the Rolex of whatever's. But we have, this is an ongoing joke between Calvin and I. Some of the stupid phrases that people use to describe some of these firearms. We've got Ivan Kid Badger in the middle image right here, who is doing his very best kimchi squat and trying to boil water with a fire that he started. And Mike, bloke on the range, with his trusty SA-80, proving the world that they are wrong. And
which, to my surprise, I don't think bloke had a single malfunction the whole match.
He did not have a single malfunction.
And he used the OG magazines that everyone says are garbage.
I think those OG magazines are the same as the FNC magazines.
No, they're aluminum, if I'm not
mistaken. No, the construct.
Oh, I suppose. I don't know.
I don't know. Anyone in the chat out there who knows, let us know.
I just know the magazines he used are supposed to be the problematic ones.
Okay, so this is interesting because for people out there who don't know, bloke on the range, Mike, our friend Mike, has a tendency of using what he calls shit tier weapon systems. He has an obsession with problematic weapon systems. I don't know what his deal is with it. He keeps on bringing these weapon systems that nobody likes, and actually works. It works for him for some reason.
I mean, he's an Enfield enjoyer. I don't think a lot of people. Well, a lot of people do say the Enfield's garbage, but I think there's enough people who think the Enfield's good. Like, we're Enfield enjoyers.
You and I know that for a fact that Lee Enfield's work. But anyways, let's get back onto the conversation, though. I wanted to start this with the rifles, because rifles are going to be the biggest piece here, right? Which rifles did you guys see? Let's start with what rifles did you guys see, or did you see that were brought out at Finnish Brutality this year?
So I brought a VZ58, PSR, borrowed an AK from Yari, a Saiga.
Okay. So that would be a Russian factory.
Russian factory AK. Yes, not Saigas like we have them, but like a European.
Yep.
Saiga.
Like a full, yes.
Like a full, basically a factory semi-auto AK.
Right.
Giga had the Wolverine, the Desert Tech bullpup thing.
So that would be the most modernized MDR.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then a few people had ARs of various makes, and I would say various quality as well.
I think Schmeiser is the brand that we guys, you and I, kind of talk about amongst ourselves quite a bit. Schmeiser is a
they're the budget European AR brand.
So it's like a Euro PSA.
I don't think they have anywhere near the volume of PSA. I don't think they have the same business model as far as like how they distribute.
Okay.
But as far as the quality of the guns, they may be below PSA.
Okay. All right. So Delton?
I suppose.
Okay, whatever.
Well, there's somewhere they probably have a range that some of them are like decent and then some of them are garbage. Just hear a lot
deceiving.
about the garbage
See,
ones.
It's deceiving to me because Schmeiser is such a big name in the weapons design world.
Well, it's like Springfield Armory. and Rock Island, and
Yeah.
yeah, those are probably the two big ones. Where
Now,
they
Rock Island,
trademark.
I think Rock Islands, especially if you're talking about the GI, the more standard spec stuff, they seem to actually work.
It's like when you stray away from there.
Yes, that's my point. That's my point. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So, all right. So, look, so the one image right here on the top right, just so people who are just on audio could also know what we're talking about, is a new Sako.
Yes.
Is it the S20?
It's some long. Well, it's like I can't SAR something. I can pull it. I don't remember.
No, the
Something
S20
40.
is a bolt action. That's
Yeah.
I don't know why I said S20.
Here
Yeah,
I
it's a
have it
new
on my phone
Sako.
somewhere.
It's a new Sako AR that they're considering as one of the primary issues.
Yeah. So this particular one was made for the Finnish Reservist Training Association. I think is what it translates to the MPK.
Mhm.
Sorry, I don't remember all the stuff off the top of my head, but this is a DI variant of the Sako AR. The Swedes who got the AK-23, that
Mhm.
is the piston variant.
Is it a
And
short or a long? Probably
short.
short. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So is it a
And
416 style piston? Do you know?
it's a secret. But all the Sako people like they act as if this is like some new technology that can't be shared.
If you issue to a general population, it's not going to be secret as soon as it hits some
Yeah.
18-year-old private's hands and his other hand is holding a cell phone with Instagram
Yeah.
installed.
Yeah, I mean it's so bad that like Sako won't let Ian look at the new Finnish version or whatever of the AK-23, so he's just gonna go to Sweden and do a video on that one, apparently.
Okay, yeah. That's
So
okay. All right,
but
so we've got one of the Sako ARs up there, which is a DI system. We've got
yes.
the VZ58. We've got the Swiss SG series, SG55 series, not the American SIG 556, but the predecessor to it. For those who all tell me that they should have bought one when they were $1,200. We've got the SA80. Did we have any AUGs or roller delays?
No AUGs, no roar delays that I can remember. A lot of people just had ARs. There's a lot of what was Thunder do rifles,
Okay.
which you would expect. Mate, he was on the media squad, but he used an RK.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the Sako M92S, which that one worked fine. Basically, like all the rifles worked. The only ones that didn't were the heavily modified ARs.
Okay.
Like I did not see any major issues anywhere. Oh, actually, there might have been one AR that wasn't heavily modified, but
Which
didn't
one was
work.
it?
It looked like a What Would Stoner Do that
Okay.
Paige was using. But there was one time where she shot where she was shooting through a barricade and was like she didn't have the shoulder stock touching her shoulder and fired, and that created the stoppage in the cold.
So that's the other interesting piece. It's not just about whether the firearms would stop itself under normal operations. Like what is normal operation, right?
Yeah.
Shooting under barricades, shooting from vehicles, shooting in awkward positions, all things that you would do in a, I would say this is a combat simulation, like in a combat environment. And you were saying, so this one thing I wanted to kind of draw back on, because you and I sort of came from the same era of shooting. We went through the same phase and evolution of firearms technology for the civilian application, I would say, especially in the 3-gun sphere. I'd say the 20 teens started maybe in the 2014-15 timeframe when people started trying to tune their ARs to where there is absolutely zero recoil. That's when I did the AK-9er project, and I tried to decrease the recoil as much as possible. I didn't do it to an extreme to where it was unreliable per se, because I always kept it to where it would still cycle like PMC bronze. But certainly compared to a like a Russian AK-101, it was completely removed. Like all the recoil is completely removed. So I kind of feel like in the last few years, and I have, despite those years of experimenting with lighter recoiling stuff, I've always put a premium on reliability. I would take more reliability and decrease about 10 to 15% on performance, whether it's accuracy or recoil control or anything like that, in order to favor reliability. And that has always been kind of an obsession of mine. But I think from that 20 teens era, we've kind of developed a lot of habits of match rifle always means let's run it all the way to the edge. Um, I realize there's kind of pros and cons to that though, because we learn a lot of things through matches and sort of that experimentation environment. I'd like to hear what you think about that whole era and whether there's a shift in the 20 teens to the current time frame in how we deal with reliability, recoil control, and accuracy.
I think it's good that we push the limits, as long as you understand where you can actually apply it. If you are using the wrong like tuning strategy for the wrong job, then you're gonna end up having a bad time. So I think what happens is people kind of confuse the roles of their rifles, where they like, well, this thing works when I'm at the range when it's a nice day out and I have a perfect shooting position where I can, shoulder the rifle and put my whole body weight behind it. But then we kind of forget that there are times where you can't shoot like that, or the temperatures get so low that you have to have some kind of buffer in the operating window to allow the gun to cycle. And I saw that with a lot of my friends that time frame. Probably they'll probably do the same things that Josh did, what I did, where we're just like, yeah, minimum gas, the least recoil. That's gonna get us the best performance.
Yeah, so from the military side, I mean, it was always a giant no-no to put personal parts into your work rifle. But I know a lot of cops who do that. Um, ah, I think they've kind of clamped down on that a little more in the
It
last
varies so much from department to department.
I mean, we can have a little bit more conversation on this because I know I have a point coming up. Talking about the Euro and the U.S. culture itself. So, but what we're seeing here, you were talking about everything except for some of these. You said that you saw some issues with some of the tuned ARs. What kind of issues
Yeah.
did you see?
Like we have a picture of my friend Claudia
Hmm.
from Poland, who also had some kind of modified AR, and it was also a Schmeiser, so that might be the Schmeiser more than the tuning. But she had several malfunctions, and this was a hard one where a casing got stuck in the chamber, so she had to mortar a round out.
Uh,
Yeah,
that's a kiss of death.
yeah. But I mean, the guys running like DDs and stuff, which Daniel Defense is a very popular brand overseas. That's probably one of the top ARs you can get without like doing going through like a lot of hoops to buy a special gun by importing. You can buy a DD from a lot of like gun stores, and those they run great.
What was Aaron admin? What was he using? The picture in the middle is admin right there.
Yeah, it looked like a Mark 18. If it was, then it's probably a DD, but I'm not 100% sure.
I was gonna say, so interesting thing. We've seen a lot of the Daniel Defense's contractors when I was in the military. A lot of contractors ended up with DDs. You see them with like contractors, or especially over in Iraq and that theater. But then afterwards, I remember seeing them in Ukraine in the like early mid-war time frame. Uh, Daniel Defense in the last 2 decades, it's interesting because it seems like they've overtaken Colt's position as that default um, duty rifle, right? I'd say Geisley has had a little bit more of has been an up and comer in the last few years, but this whole entire time, I think Daniel Defense has kind of held that standard for the duty rifle side.
Yeah, BCM is another one, on the stateside at least.
That's true, yeah. Well, the Daniel, so BCM is basically kind of like you explained this to me, uh, like a subcontracted rifle, but all with really good QC and assembly.
Yeah, right. That
Whereas
was my understanding of them.
Daniel certainly is everything in house, and especially you pay for that barrel, the Daniel Defense barrel that comes
Yeah, the cold hammer
with the
forged barrel.
yeah. So one thing that I'm hearing here is the gassing. You know, a lot of times that 2017, 2018 style gassing, the super light type of gassing, it may work in one climate, it doesn't in another. It's kind of something we've learned from the days of the M4's development, though, isn't it?
It's one of those lessons that yes, we learned, but individuals, especially those of us who are newer into shooting, like we kind of forget. Like we probably have forgotten a lot of lessons that the generation before us has learned when it comes to like classical shooting, right?
LAV,
So
LAV is going to come out here and teach us.
yeah, B8s, shooting B8s. Yeah, like
Yeah.
if I think maybe in 20 years, like we'll all forget bullseye pistol shooting. Like no one's gonna know how to do it.
For people in the comments out there, let us know what your favorite Larry Vickers video was. Those were the golden days. Anyways,
But
sponsored
yeah,
by BCM, right?
yep. So
Ah.
one failure on the rifles that we didn't talk about was my VZ58. I had like crazy failures, but it wasn't the rifle; it was the ammunition.
We're going to get to that in a bit.
Oh, okay.
We have a
Okay, we'll
slide
put
that
that
we're
on
going to
there.
get to that because I
Gotcha.
think ammunition is a big piece right here,
Okay.
especially when you throw in any type of particular alternate, anything in the environmentals that would affect it. That actually happens. We've been seeing a lot of that in the precision side as we're doing more work with the CSAS and MRGG type systems. But we'll talk about that more in a bit. Let's see. Pistols. All right. So a lot of times people don't think much about pistols because, I mean, rightfully so. It's a secondary. But if you end up needing to use your pistol, damn it, that thing better work. You're
Yeah.
not in a good spot in reality. There's that famous image of, you remember that Marine? Was he
Oh yeah.
like a sergeant major or something?
Something like that. He was a senior NCO.
Yeah, he
It
was
was
all
Fallujah,
bloodied up.
right?
Yeah, he was
Yeah.
all bloodied up, and they were carrying in. I mean, like,
And his M9 was stopped the slide lock. He emptied a whole mag, at
yes.
least one mag. Yeah. So
Yeah. So when you're down to in a combat environment, yeah, you can kind of sleep on the maintenance of pistols. I mean, people do all the time. I think that's a really bad idea personally. I've always been a staunch proponent of keeping up the pistols maintenance cycles and especially cleaning
yeah.
and stuff like that.
Have you
Just
seen my Tempolios?
I have, but you're also not using that in a combat environment.
That's
You also
true.
have two of them, one to practice and one to game
Yeah.
with.
Yeah, no, my actual carry gun, I keep them clean.
So before, hold on, let me see. So this guy is saying that he loved Larry Vickers' Sturmgewehr series. Larry Vickers is gross. He needs more money, evidently.
Hey. Free my man. Yeah, nothing.
Here we go. Free Larry Vickers.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways, all right, back to the pistol conversation. I think if you end up using your pistol, and this is a military setting, right? Law enforcement is different. Law enforcement wise, like pistol's kind of your primary, which in my opinion would make it even more important.
Yeah. Yep.
But the pistol is kind of that baseline, I think. And again, another piece for us who have the privilege to conceal carry. And I say
The right,
privilege
damn
because
it.
I've lived in a lot
Oh.
of places that is not a right. And I think we are privileged to have that right to conceal carry in Texas. That's why I say that. I think the pistol maintenance is more important than anything, especially if it's a piece that you use as your lifeline. Now, pistol wise, you guys certainly saw a lot of issues in a varied amount of different platforms.
Yeah, and those platformers all had one thing in common. They were all striker fired. And I think it's easy to say, hammer fire is better than striker fired. It's like that's not the full story. I think what it is striker fires are just more prone to failure when you don't prep them. I think hammer fired guns, because they have more mass and more energy behind the hammer, they can have a little bit of gunked up oil in them and still ignite the primers. So we're getting a lot of light strikes with striker fired guns because either the lube in the firing pin channel had become gummy from the cold temperatures,
Mhm.
or the guns would build condensation from going inside to outside where it's warm to cold, and then the water would freeze. So it's one of those two.
Now,
And
on the concealed carry side, you also have like your bodies. Like for us in our environment, you also have your body moisture. That is, I mean, it sounds really nasty. It is. Uh,
but yeah, that's
but
reality.
but for you specifically in out there, it was you were saying this condensation when you're moving between hot and cold, hot and cold, hot and cold.
Yep.
So that's different. That's difficult though. I mean, it's usually a sidearm you keep on you. So did you see any Glocks go down?
Quite a few. So Admin's Glock, he had a G19 Gen 3 that he borrowed, and that had light strike after light strike in a row. So he was just tap racking for a lot of the pistol stages.
And he was also law enforcement too, so he's primarily familiar with,
Yeah, it's the thing is he borrowed that gun from somebody, and we don't know how they prep the guns.
Okay, so that should be brought up. One of the issues that I see here now, you see a lot of Americans, especially on the influencer side, showing up at Finnish Brutality, and instead of exporting their own firearms, you exported your own
I did.
BZ-58.
Yep.
Ian
Through Les Winter at Polaris.
Yep. So
Yep.
Ian also exported his. The last time you exported your Scar, but not a lot of people export things, so they end up borrowing things when they're over there, and you don't know what the person did to it, right?
Yep. So of the guns that have problems, we weren't able to do a deep dive and see if they changed any parts, did any aftermarket stuff. For example, the TFB cameraman, he shot the pre-match with a CZ P10F, and that was also supposed to be James Reeves's pistol, but because the P10 didn't work at all, James Reeves opted to borrow Micah's 2011 that he was lent. So they swapped between those two guns because the P10 just wasn't working.
Interesting.
Yep.
That's a striker fire. That's another striker fire.
Yep, CZ P10F. My CZ75, I did not prep it whatsoever. I didn't do anything to it. It still has the old motor oil in it from when I oiled it last. It's not a gun I shoot often. I don't neglect it, but I also didn't do anything special to prepare for the match.
Is that what you're shooting in that picture on the right?
Yes. Yep. Just a bone stock CZ75 pre-B.
Okay. And no issues.
No issues. Blokes high power, no issues. Less used than M9A3, no issues. The Bull 2011 that Micah and James shared, no issues.
So, which one of the striker fires did have issues? I see the ARX right there. The
RX the Delta that hit issues. So Giga kind of gamed it. He, make ready when you load your pistol, get ready for the stage. He dry fired, so that way it would loosen the striker if there was any water in there that froze.
Well, so was he like Israeli drawing that stuff almost?
No. You do it before the stage started because they would say load and make ready. So he'd do it then. But the funny thing is, in IPSC and IPSC, you're not allowed to dry fire at make ready. So, he was gaming the loading procedure, which obviously you'd want to do, but in real life, you don't get an opportunity to break your firing pin or your striker loose before you start shooting, right?
So, here's a next slide right here. You're showing a USP and a Glock 19.
I don't recall anyone with a USP, but if there was a USP there, I would imagine it would also go through with zero problems.
See, the USP is one of those things. I like USPs not because they shoot amazing as far as like a performance pistol, but it's one of those things that it's the dependability on why you would choose a USP if you chose a USP. Now, it is a dated pistol. Do you think so? Okay, you said the 2011 also worked okay though.
Yeah.
So it's basically it's the hammer fired pistols that all
That's
worked
what
for.
we think, because that's kind of the common denominator here. The only striker fired pistol, well, I'd say there were some Glocks, but the PDP that PSR used also had no issues. But that came from Yari, and Yari is a very meticulous human being, and he probably prepped it.
For those who don't know, Yari is the
He's a
Varistelica's
CEO.
CEO. And he is a kind of a monster of a human being when it comes to shooting and fitness and prepping kit and all that.
Yeah,
He is the kind of person you want to be the CEO of a surplus and firearm centric, preparation centric company. I would be curious here if a P99 would work.
I guess it would depend on how heavy that striker is, or
because you've got
there's
to
no hammer in it, right?
There's no hammer, but there's second strike capability because it's a it's kind of like a DASA but with a striker fire. It's difficult to explain because you could put it on single stage or you could put it on double stage, and then if it doesn't fire on double stage, a P99 you could pull the trigger again and recock with the pull of the trigger on the firing pin. So sort of doing what Giga does in prepping that shot if you needed to, like if there was a failure, which actually so basically the question there is, do you think there's any use for a
Double strike capability?
Double strike capability, yeah.
I don't know. I never use it. And I shoot double action guns.
Mm-hmm.
If I ever have a stoppage, I'm racking one out because I think the risk of whether it's the cartridge or the gun, like it's just not worth trying that round again when you can rack a new one in, and that has a higher chance of working again.
Yeah. No, that's a good call too.
I think that's what's being taught now. Like I don't think any modern shooting schools really teach the double strike as a malfunction clearing practice.
So good point by Solid Snake here in the comments section. The only problem with a P99 is a big hole in the back where the striker protrudes. Basically, he's talking about having the firearm well sealed or not, and having dirt and debris going inside of it, which is the point that our friend on our Patreon Discord had brought up. Christian, the Norwegian guy, he was talking about, and he's military too, so he's talking about one of their biggest focuses in the Norwegian military is, don't get snow all covered into your firearm, which, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Like if you were working in the jungle, you don't want to slap a lot of mud onto your rifle and just expect it to be able to take mud, right? You just take care of your firearm. In this instance, he was talking about you just don't want snow to pack your firearm and then act like nothing's going on without cleaning it, which is one of the problems during the Mike over at Grantham also did a lot of the snow testing or the cold weather testing. But the big thing is, and he subjected them to very unrealistic scenarios where he sprayed water all over it and had it freeze, like actually freeze. And I think without the moisture, a lot of them worked, but with the moisture, once you put moisture onto those things, that was a big issue.
Yeah, I would say it would be really unrealistic to get your gun soaking wet and then not do anything about it if you were if you knew what you were doing. Like that.
So that leads me to another thing then. One of the biggest complaints about pistol optics and why people would use enclosed pistol red dots is because the snow and dirt and debris would get into the little the reflector in the front. Did you see anyone with issues with the pistol optics during this?
No, I would say the physical challenges that we had this match didn't really require us to crawl that deep into the snow or do anything crazy. But I think there have been matches in the past where there was enough mud that obscured optics on pistols.
Were there any SIG P320s that could end the conversation today?
There were no 320s on our squads. I don't know about for the rest of the match.
Okay, so I guess the ND to the leg was 0.
So my very first Finnish Brutality, I borrowed a P320 X5 Legion.
How was that?
And the gun worked mostly. It was sensitive to sand. Like once sand got into the gun, I had like the gun would lock up. But I have all my hands, and I'm still alive. And
okay.
I don't have any holes in my legs.
I was just talking about this with one of my friends just right before our call right now too. The 1911 has survived in the U.S. arsenal from 1911 all the way up to. I mean, they just recently started surplusing them to the CMP, but they started phasing them out in the 80s, right? In the mid 80s, under the JSSAP program that adopted the M9. So that was 70 plus years before it was phased out and then still kept in arsenal before it was surplused out. The M9 served since 85 all the way to, what was it, 2017? When it started getting phased out?
That sounds about right.
Yeah, so that was 30 some years, 30 odd years. But it survived Gulf War, OIF, OEF, so 3 dirt wars. So you've got 2 world wars and 3 dirt wars on these 2, right? And obviously the M9 is not phased out. Is not surplused out. I mean, I very much wish it were, because I very much like to purchase my own. That was the pistol that we were issued as junior officers, and I'd very much like my surplus 19 M9. The funny thing with the M17 is that you started seeing surplus ones after 2 years of issuance.
Because the wrong colors on the controls, right? That was the issue.
Oh, it's because we had such a high standard of quality control that we would reject the wrong color. Okay, that's right. That makes sense.
Yeah, it had nothing to do with like sights and optics flying off and failures and that stuff. No, it was the color.
Right. It ends today. All right. Anyways, carrying on after the pistol side, we did have a patron question. I usually put the patron questions at the very end, but I thought that this was a very apt one to talk about here. What would be the one thing, Calvin, that you would take from Finnish/European firearms culture and implant it into the American firearm culture? And a couple things that we've talked about that I wanted to hear you talk about were the modification culture and the sporting culture, i.e., it's harder to get into shooting in Europe. Therefore, it appears that people who do get into it are more serious about it. But I'd like to hear you and what you think about.
Yeah, I would say for Finland specifically, because I spent probably the most time there as far as shooting wise. For them, there is a higher barrier to entry into shooting, so they do they learn about the sports. They actually get a license to shoot a lot of sports. You need a license to shoot IPSC or to shoot SRA. I imagine for IDPA as well. And you actually have to learn the rules and learn to show them that you're competent with a firearm, all this stuff. But then also in Finland specifically, they have mandatory conscription for the males. So national defense is also a big thing on their minds. So naturally, the two actually coincide a lot. So when people buy firearms in Finland, they buy them for sporting, all that stuff. But the secondary function is to defend their country. which I don't know if we really think of firearms use like that here in the States. Like we buy them
People.
to protect ourselves,
Mhm.
but we don't really buy them with the intent that we may use it on a foreign aggressor.
I think when you have, if there's a looming threat, that gives you more of a reason. Like that puts that behind in your mind to do that more so.
Yes,
But when you're the when you when you are the one who could issue threats, it certainly changes that game. And then I guess people get to have the privilege of shooting guns into trash.
yeah. So I would say the competency of the average Finnish firearms owner is probably higher than that of the average American firearms owner, and that might upset a lot of people, but
I,
it's just the way their system works. They have to
Perhaps
do
that,
it.
like, I would phrase that. I think if I'm reading you right, you're saying that the percentage of competent firearm owners is relatively greater than the percentage of competent firearms owners in the States, despite us having the right to bear arms.
Right.
People don't typically push themselves because it seems to be just a given thing.
Exactly. And as far as the modification culture, because they view their firearms as possibly used for national defense, and maybe this is me just kind of thinking too hard into it, but they don't modify their guns like we do. They do have modifications, especially the sports shooters. Like if you're a pure IPSC shooter, yeah, you're gonna modify your gun a bit, but you don't have this Gucci Glock culture and like Strike Industries red anodized AR culture that we have in the States.
Well, I also think though, if these things are more valuable, then you, like, if you only have like one car between your entire family, the chances of you getting to put like flames on the wheel wells and 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 repaint the rims to a purple color is probably dramatically lowered because your father would most likely murder you.
That's true. Yeah, the like a DD there costs like 2,500 euros or something, like for a base model.
Spot my impact bro said we have Dremels in Europe too. Yes, our friends Polinar Tactical has most certainly proven that Europeans do also modify firearms.
Yes.
But you're talking specifically about the Finnish culture. Uh, I think. Okay, so
You can
there's.
still find a Bubba Mosin in Finland. Like they exist. It's just not as prevalent as it is here.
I mean, it goes back to the fact that it's easier to get into firearms. Okay, I wouldn't make it more difficult to get into firearms. I don't think that's what you're saying. I
No,
think
no,
that
no.
the idea of owning firearms is a much more treasured idea for people over there. Like the concept
Yeah,
of owning firearms is more treasured.
right.
And
I
so,
definitely would not want to make it more difficult to get firearms here. That's
yeah,
kind of the beauty of this country.
yeah. So, do you think? And there ought to be a conversation on the difference between modifying something versus using, like, nowadays, because of the modular nature of stuff of firearms, you could use a lot of components that are modular, like that is not a hard modification of the firearm. Like it's different from dremeling something. Like if you have to Dremel an AR, that's completely different from just using a wrench to swap like a handguard out, because you can go back
Yeah,
to it.
we do have like a bolt-on. Like there are a lot of bolt-on mods that still affect reliability. I think what's common, especially with Glocks, is people will try to put the lightest striker springs they can, and they use the lightest strikers. That
Hmm.
way, they get a better trigger pull, and that really hurts the reliability, even when it's just like perfectly dry and warm weather.
So that's an interesting thing because, so for me, I certainly started using a lot of like Geisley triggers back in the day, like two-stage triggers. CMC was a brand that I used a lot. But the more I shot, the more I ended up just keeping my stuff the mil spec 5 to 8 pound trigger on it. And I actually started like now I'm completely different from the normal shooter out there because I shoot a lot of things that normal people just don't like to shoot. And so I like to use more mil spec triggers because I know exactly where I've pushed myself to work on identifying the wall and that follow through trigger pull. And I'm saying I push myself with a lot of milsurps specifically that normal people don't shoot for precision purposes. And when I go back into using match triggers sometimes, like I pick up Josh's like JP single staged match guns, I almost feel like I lack control of these hyper light triggers myself. I don't know what that says about, the shooting culture itself, but I certainly, instead of dumping money into the trigger itself, I certainly started favoring spending the time on the range to shoot, and no regrets on that personally. But I know that's also not a luxury because it's not just money; that's also time that you have to spend to do things
Yeah.
like that.
Also, don't want to say that all modifications are bad. There are modifications that are probably more reliable than the OEM option.
AUG is a good example on this. So the AUGs have been renowned for the worst trigger pull in any bullpup known to mankind in
Any
America.
rifle known to man.
Right. So and one of the reasons is because Steyr decided to put these civilian specific springs into the trigger packs, the black springs, and they were like 2.5 times heavier on the pull weight than the normal military springs. So if you actually swap the springs out, you get a decent 5-pound military trigger pull. And especially if you adjust the trigger shoe, then it takes a lot of the take up to find the wall. But you don't have you could also get trigger parts that are aftermarket trigger parts that are not drop safe but have a quote unquote amazing trigger pull. And so that strays into the area of it's modifying a firearm into working in a way that it was not designed to work. It may or may not suit a purpose, but you're then detracting some factory designs away from it. And those things could be safety related. Let's see. Here we are. So the next topic we'll talk about comes down to munition and magazines. This is going to be, so if we're talking on the vein of we put a huge emphasis on reliability, I think munition and magazines, most certainly that is a for the more like us in our earlier days of shooting, I definitely bought a lot of gun show reloads and the cheapest magazines I could get after I bought my Delton AR. So talk about stacking tolerances. But you had a unique experience with Gecko ammunition out here, didn't you?
Yeah. So all my life, I've shot pretty much just Russian steel case 760x39. So it never occurred to me that you could make 760x39 that didn't work. So this is factory Gecko, and what they failed to do was they did not crimp the necks after seating the bullets. So on a VZ58 especially, where it has a very steep feed angle, I was just getting failures of feed like once every like 3 or 4 rounds with this ammo. And it's not specific to the gun either, because PSR also had an issue with this ammo in an AK.
Now, so for people out there who are wondering, a casing, so the cartridge, the shell casing, it grabs onto the projectile, right? And so the neck has to have a certain amount of neck tension. There's a lot of, let's say, like my 308 reloads, I have my own way of designating neck tension on the casing, so I make sure that the casing is grabbing on to a lot of the bullet's space to where it won't get tucked in. Like you see, there's an image on the left for those who could visually see right here. The casing, the cartridge on the very top looks like it is indeed very, very cold in this weather, in a sense that it is like pushed in about like 3-4 millimeters. What happens in military cartridges, not only do you have a certain neck tension, you also crimp the very front of it, meaning you squeeze the front of the casing to where it has a very positive grab onto the projectile, so that what you're seeing, let me see right here on the screen, that does not happen. And when that happens, the interesting thing is you can actually see, outside of having stoppages, it's also highly inaccurate, because then you have a very random pressure curve that is generated in your casing, which you can see. How far is that target that Giga's holding? How far was that?
40 meters.
40 meters. That is, and my
roughly
MP5,
like a 5-inch, 6-inch group.
My MP5 does much tighter than that. I will put it that way. And
my Mosin would do much tighter than that.
Your VZ58 is the D Technic, right? That's a tree check one. So
same check original barrel.
Same as, well, mine's a Lothar Walther, but still, that is the very good version of the VZ58s that are available in the civilian market. And it's one of those firearms that's known to be one of the most accurate 7.6239s, semi-auto 7.6239s you can get. And for that to do this, one of the big reasons is because of that. And this is the Hungarian rebranded Gecko
Hungarian
ammunition.
Contracted, whatever. Maybe, I don't know if they have a factory there. Because Gecko's a Swiss brand.
The funny thing is, what does it say there? Where excitement starts. Indeed, that says where excitement starts on the box, which is certainly exciting. It's one thing in a shooting environment, in a competition environment, to have an exciting, I don't know if I'm going to hit the target. It's another thing if your life depended on this ammunition and you found out that it was not crimped.
It's like 12 MOA ammo out of my gun. And when I shot it, I was like, okay, something was wrong. I don't know if it's me, the gun, or the ammo. So I gave everything to Giga, and he got the exact same results I did.
Yeah. So this was sponsored ammunition for Varusteleka, right?
I'm not. I know it was provided to us. I don't know exactly the relationship.
Were you able to purchase your own?
I could, and what I ended up doing was, Les is so nice. He had leftover ammo from after he got done shooting, and he gave me the rest of his PMC 7.60x39.
Oh yeah,
and that stuff works great.
Yeah.
So Les Winter, Polaris Logistics. If you need to buy a gun from Europe or anywhere overseas, I guess, as long as it's legal here, you can have it. He can bring it to you.
Calvin, we don't talk about buying things. We talk about transporting things and legal representation during that transport process.
He can put it on a plane.
Yes.
And,
as far as, so munition and magazines are two of the major features two of the major enablers, make or break items to a firearm's reliability. That I think it's kind of crazy, when people are looking at. So with the AR-10 world, one of the things, AR-10s are fairly finicky when you change the loading that the rifles are working with. And so earlier we were having issues with Hornady branded match ammunition that was giving us like 120 feet per second on the extreme spread. You guys are going to see it in some practical accuracy episodes, because we found out after we shot it that it was doing so poorly because of the ammunition. But in that aspect, even though the firearms worked, the accuracy was absolute crap because the charge was inconsistent. as far as the magazines, I also know a lot of guys who buy the cheapest magazines and then get surprise Pikachu face when their firearm is choking up. Specifically, like with H&Ks, with the Korean mags, with Pro mags.
Why are you
Um,
racist against Koreans? What did they ever do to you?
hey, just make better mags, and I won't identify it by the origin. I mean, I understand though. Like large part of it, it's reverse engineered stuff. It's the same thing with when you get a Century, the C308s. The parts, it may be a parts build with surplus G3 parts, but the receiver, if the dimensions are all off, you're not going to get the same performance out of it, unfortunately. Same thing with a barrel, but in this case with a magazine especially, if you're not even even like a C308, you could use like a cheap G3 mag and it'll still work fine. But if you start using magazines that have issues themselves, you can't expect the rifle to work from it. And then same thing with the ammunition.
Yeah, I use factory mags. They work great.
Yeah, I mean, same thing. I think after all these years of shooting, we kind of oh no, people in the chat are now talking about the KCI stuff.
Yeah, I'm not one of the kind of people who likes to go out and test a bunch of different new magazine brands or types.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if it's something established like a PMag, I'll use those. I have plenty of PMags. But for anything else, I'm pretty much gonna buy factory mags.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
Or
I mean,
Guard that makes the factory mags for the manufacturer, something like that, like a contractor.
Yeah. So basically, someone with a pretty decent reputation and track record on these things, right? Yeah. It's just not worth the $20 you save, because you're gonna waste that money in ammunition that gets jammed up in your rifle in the long term.
Yeah, there's some times where I'd rather single feed a semi-auto than try to work with some of these like garbage tier magazines at the range.
So interesting point on that. And Zach, or one of our mutual friends, Zach Brandon Herrera's lead gunsmith, has been talking about looking at the AKP mags, and that he's seen issues with the AKP mags in actual AKs. So I don't know entirely. I have a few AK mags I was going to test. I just haven't gotten to it. You have an AK behind you. But typically, I end up using a lot of Bakelights and normal steel mags myself.
I own a couple AKP mags that I've gotten from matches and whatnot, and I have not ever opened the packages to use them.
Yeah.
I just have some of these steel European and Chinese mags and bakes that, in Circle 10 waffles.
Yeah. I end up using that as trade fodder whenever they come in, whatever thing that I bought secondhand.
Yeah.
Anyways, lubrication. Now, okay, specifically, I put some Germans in this from the 40s who were having a hard time on the Eastern Front. You can see they're not necessarily in Disney World, but this is having lubrication issues. Having lubricants freeze has been a phenomenon for a long time, and the Germans learned it the hard way. There's a lot of documented cases where, like, their 98Ks, you couldn't pop the action open because their lubricant had frozen over on the Eastern Front in Russia. I think you were telling me Frog Lube had been an interesting thing in the cold.
Yeah, it's something that I've never used, but Frog Lube was really popular, I think, back in the 20 teens. And, some Navy SEAL had invented it, so it's got to be great. And a lot of people who ended up buying it found out that it would gum up when it got cold. So people shooting, specifically 3-gun matches is where I heard this from. When it got cold, even here in Texas, their ARs and their shotguns.
Like Texas
out-
cold, not
Texas
Finland
cold, not real cold. Yeah, just Texas cold, like 30 degrees or something.
So from the military supply system, POL is petroleum and oil lubricants. That's a big field for military operations, not just firearms. I mean, it's a big thing with vehicles and all sorts of equipment as well. I think we've had some conversations with some like Swiss people where they were getting angry that I was using white lithium in my Swiss SIGs.
yeah, it's got to be Aeroshell 64. Can't be anything else.
Okay, there you go. So there's a range here, right? So there's a truly autistic side where you have to use a specific brand, a specific type, a specific weight of lubrication. But then on the other side, there's also people who would just use whatever and throw it in there. I think we're kind of blessed in Texas to where we could, like, I use a lot of 5W30 in my stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not going out to buy frog lube. That's pretty expensive stuff. If you look at, ounce per ounce, it's not going to be as cheap as 5W30 from the automotive section.
Yeah, I think the warmer climates you live in, the more you can get away with using a wider variety of lubes without having any consequences.
But in the cold, though, I know, so graphite lube was a big thing. Same thing in the desert. A lot of guys like to use dry lube instead of wet lube, because wet lube, especially grease, started attracting a lot of sand, and then that would gum it up. And that's what I know is in the desert. So I've read that some people up north in the cold like to use graphite, so it's a dry lube as well.
Okay. We didn't really get a lesson on lube in our little miniature survival class, but what they told us was if it's like super freezing cold, a completely dry gun is better than using the wrong lube. And part of the reason why the FDF likes their RK so much is because the AK system can run for a very long time without any lube. And I guess Glocks can do the same thing. Except
the Glocks had issues with firing pins freezing up.
That's what we think, but we're not 100% sure. It's maybe a combination of the lube gumming up and because there were some.
No, the AK has a hammer, Calvin.
Oh yeah, that's the reason why. But then the
I would argue that the VZ58 has a linear hammer.
Yeah,
I know.
it's a linear hammer. It's not a striker.
I called it a striker in the past because it's like,
yeah,
I get it. It's a linear hammer. So
yeah, now when you actually look at it, you're like, yeah, this is separate from the firing pin. So
yeah. So basically the Finns like to run things completely dry.
That's not, no, they said if you don't have the correct lube, it's better to run dry than to use the wrong lube.
So what kind of lube do they use?
I have no idea. We didn't get that lesson. Or I was asleep during that. I'm sure they have something that says like for cold weather, I assume.
So I just put this here for people to see because, a lot of times people throw the automotive terms around, but they don't exactly know what it's used for. Now, the temperature, as my understanding, is that the temperature in centigrade, and then that's how you get the numbers on the different types of oil types. That's my understanding. But I think it's different for an automotive use, because in automotive you're constantly using it in a like an engine that's generating heat, whereas when you throw it into a rifle, that's not. I mean, if your rifle is constantly generating heat, I think you're going to run into other issues outside of just the lubrication itself, or you're running a machine gun. So, but I certainly have used a lot of like 5W30, and I just use that. And in our environment here in Texas, that seems to be a very economical solution to lubrication. That and white lithium grease, just for me. It doesn't have to be the white lithium grease. Lithium grease comes in different colors. Could be gray, it could be blue. So, yeah.
I use Aeroshell 64 because apparently that's the best lube you can use, according to SIG. SIG Switzerland, not the one that says it ends today.
Were there any SIG spears out there?
Not that I saw at the match.
Have you
They
seen
could have
them
been.
out there in any of these years? I know.
I-
Didn't Ian bring it one year?
I don't know. Spear, as in like the big boy, or the Spear LT, the little guy.
Either one, the MCX.
There's MCXs are popular in general across a lot of Europe. So the people who are willing to spend, well, actually for them it's like the same as buying a DD, I think. Maybe slightly more, but I've seen some MCX variants around. I just don't know which ones are which because they keep on changing them.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was in Estonia, my first time ever shooting an MCX was in Estonia.
Since you brought up Estonia, I think it's interesting. We can go back on the overgassing side.
Oh yeah.
A lot of the European firearms tend to be highly overgassed. I mean, I think that's something for us with like older school military AKs, and we've been into older military AKs way before the trend of tuning the AK's gas.
And old ARs too.
Yeah. It used to be just it was what it is, especially ARs when you're running it with a 16-inch carbine gas barrel and a non-H2 buffer.
Yeah, I have an old SP1 that kicks like a mule by AR standards, SP1 carbine, and that would be like on par with some of these European military rifles.
Mm-hmm.
That they recoil quite a bit. Like I shot the LMT, the R20 Rahu, the one that we can actually buy the reference rifles here in the States, but I wonder if their gas the same, because this thing, it felt like almost 7.62 by 39 out of an AR. And I mean, I'm almost embarrassed to put a video of me shooting full. Well, I can't do it, but let's pretend there was a video of me shooting full auto. The rifle would go up and to the right so much that I'd never experienced that before in an AR, shooting full auto. I've shot like Sons of Liberty's DI guns and some other M4 type guns, and they don't do that like this one did.
Huh. The Bundeswehr G36s that I shot were okay. Like, I certainly don't think they're overgassed. I think there seems to be a tendency for the shorties to be very overgassed.
Yeah, I shot a G36K as well, the export variant, and that one was way more tame than the LMT.
No, I'm specifically talking about like the mini barrels and G36Cs, some of the shorties that
the super shorties. Okay.
Yeah, I think the manufacturers are trying to make sure that they function no matter what, and so they're just juicing that gas into them. Your SG553 is not a good example on that, but typically
I have a new one, so we'll find out if it works or not.
So just for some background here, Calvin has had issues with his SG553, the Stromgewehr 07 clone that he put together, and the one that you had was
factory
overgassed, right?
Yeah, there's so many undiagnosed problems that I just know it's a lemon.
Yeah.
So,
but they did
got
take care of you. They did take care of you.
They gave me a whole new gun,
yeah.
unfired, and it's still unfired. I need to go to the range and test it.
Calvin,
I've been lazy. I've been out of the country. I've been on the continent where they're made instead of at home shooting it.
Oh, so no, I've seen some of the shorties. Like, if you think about it, like crinks are really bouncy. I'm not saying that they're over. it's difficult to describe. It's very
What
bouncy. Like, it
my
moves.
question now is like, what is overgassed? I think that term gets thrown around a lot on
Mhm.
guns that are just made to function in this operating window.
Yeah. Specifically with military firearms, right? There's a lot of times when military firearms were put together, specifically during the Cold War era. All of these that we're talking about are Cold War era, with the barrels like post Cold War, but still with a Cold War mentality to generate it. They go through pretty strenuous government uh, testing, and a lot of those government testing cycles do designate for them to work in conditions like this. Like a freeze tank is a pretty standard thing for government testing to do on these things.
Yeah.
Uh,
When I went to Sig Neuhausen, they had this whatever cold machine that makes the room like the same temperatures as Siberia, like literally, and that's how they test the guns, make sure they work in that environment. And that's probably common across all the major small arms manufacturers.
see, this is another thing. I should have brought it up earlier when we were talking about optics. So when I was working near Siberia, I worked up there in the northern part of China at one point. We were running cameras and stuff, and like being outside in -25, the cameras uncovered and everything. Those things were burning through batteries so fast. I'd be curious if the red dot sights were burning through batteries as well in the cold.
We didn't run into that issue. At least not. I know some people had batteries that died, but again, we don't know if that was from poor preparation or from the actual cold itself.
Yeah.
Our iPhones, the batteries were being used up faster than normal. On all the camera guys, I think they were using batteries faster than normal.
Yeah, it's like 2, 3 times faster than
Yeah.
normal. So we constantly had to plug in wherever we went. We constantly had to carry insulated and heated battery packs. And we used to carry batteries in our armpits just to keep them warm before we stuck them into cameras. So that was one of the big questions on the sighting system. I would be curious if some of these guys typically have more like QD red dots to where they could drop down to iron sights, or at least like 1/3 co-wit iron and red dots, just as a backup.
I didn't see any of that. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, but I didn't see it.
Huh. Yeah, we
Yeah.
should follow up on that with some of the fins. Let me see. We're definitely over time right now, but we're almost there at the end. So yeah, fogging and optics were a big thing. You were talking about using neck gaiters. If you ever use neck gaiters, like basically your glasses are all done.
Yeah, and I think someone in the Discord said wear ski goggles, and I know PSR wore some sort of goggles. I'm not sure they're specifically ski goggles, but they also fogged up. So yeah, I would probably in the future probably take a look into some like anti-fog, like cat crap or whatever other ones there are out there.
See, these are glasses I had on when I was in -25 in Harbin,
Hmm.
and you could see the fog formed around it and then iced up, and then it kept on icing up to where it just turned into ice. And I tried to scratch the middle to scratch the ice out, and I just had this like ice circle around,
Hmm.
and it kind of like it was in video game, like when you get shot in like PUBG or something, like the whole like you start getting a vignette around you. That was kind of
Oh
like I
yeah.
was looking through, like it was vignetted in the middle. Um, but you had an interesting point in talking about weapon stowage and weapon storage overnight to cut down on condensation.
Yeah, so the fence, they told us that depending on the situation, if they were able to sleep indoors where it was warm, they wouldn't necessarily bring their rifles inside with them. They keep them outside in the cold and cover them so they don't get covered by snow. But then that way they're not changing temperatures and building condensation in the rifles and causing malfunctions. So there's pros and cons to doing it that way. The con is you don't have your rifle with you, but then the pro is your rifle will most likely still work without you doing any maintenance. So it's
I think it needs to be put into perspective when you're in really, really cold places for those who are. I mean, this is certainly kind of a culture shock for me. Like when I was walking around, I would feel icicles forming in my nose. As soon as I took my neck gaiter down, you'd feel icicles in your nose, and then you could break the icicles by just pinching your nose a little bit. But then as soon as you breathed in again, you start feeling the icicles form in your nose. That's how fast condensation would freeze. And I don't have an image here, but you had an image of one of your socks that like froze solid.
Yeah, so one of the stages, you get into a pool of water and you shoot some targets, and then you get out and you change out of your wet clothes into dry clothes. And I had left my wet clothes out for maybe an hour, and my sock was frozen solid, like a popsicle, basically.
I would venture to say that it was frozen solid before that hour was up, to be honest.
Probably. And then like this is also the first time I've ever had my hair freeze. Never had my hair freeze before until this trip. So
I've had that happen before, like especially when you're wearing helmets, and like it kind of bakes you a little bit where the top, because like older helmets were a lot colder because you only had like the harness on the top, like the paskets only had the harness, but then the newer ones had those pads that kind of baked your head, kept it warm a little bit. If you took it off, and then that would start getting cold, and then if you were off for long and you were outside and you didn't put like a beanie on, you would definitely get your head frozen.
Yeah, beanie was a must. Layering up was a must. So one of the things that really helped was having this like fishnet looking like shirt and pants. And
you're wearing fishnet, huh, Calvin?
Yeah.
Impressing the dudes in the sauna, I see.
No, we didn't wear anything in the saunas. Wearing clothes in the sauna is weird, bro. No one does that. But yeah, the fishnet was supposed to create air pockets that insulate you from the cold. So that's why that layer was the first that went on. And then you have more merino wool layers. I think I only wear like 4 or 5 layers of clothing, and none of them were particularly thick. But if you have the proper layers with proper materials, they can keep you quite warm.
Yeah. All right. So we had some patron questions. This is the last slide. As we're going through patron questions for the audience, ladies and gentlemen out there, if you have any questions you want to dial in on the chat, put it in right now. We'll start pulling questions out of the chat as well. Goatee out of our patron side was asking, how weird is it being at an influencer event, and does it spell the end for humanity?
I don't know if I would call Finnish Brutality an influencer event. There just happened to be 2 squads that were full of influencers, but the overwhelming majority of the match is just a normal match. It just happens to get a lot of publicity because Marsaleka sponsors it and wants to use it to market. If you ever go to any other matches, you will probably have a very similar experience. It's just they brought a bunch of influencers together and we got to hang out and do influencer stuff, I guess.
Josh and I don't go to a lot of these things. I'll get into it. There's a question about that in a bit. But so Mongo was asking about how big of a mistake was it to use a VZ58?
The only mistake was not knowing that the ammo wasn't going to be crimped.
Frankly, I don't think that was a 58 issue though, because you said the AK had the same issue, right? With that ammo.
And all the Finnish ROs who saw my malfunctions, they're like, yeah, that ammo's garbage. We don't use it in our guns. We don't like using it in our guns. I'm like, okay.
And let's put this into perspective. The Finnish ROs are the guys who are using RKs. This is a 76239 country.
Yes, for now, it is still their primary cartridge.
All right. Were people still mistaking you for Henry? I get that there may not be many Southeast Asian people there, but come on.
On the contrary, I saw quite a few Vietnamese people in Helsinki, And there are a ton of Vietnamese restaurants there now.
Oh,
I went to one, and it was very okay. But I guess it's good for, European European country.
Vietnamese food is surprisingly stable around the world, though. I would say I've had Mexican food in Germany, and that was an absolute horrendous experience. It's on the scale of my French friends when I showed them what spray can cheese was in America.
Oh God! Wait till you try Nordic Mexican food. It's probably just as amazing as German Mexican food.
Mexican food with no jalapenos.
Mexican food, like they'll put cucumbers in their tacos and stuff. Like it's not bad. It's just not what we grew up eating. Eating Mexican food. But the Henry thing was actually one person mistaked me for Henry, and then it became a joke from there on out.
Yeah,
and he was really excited that I was.
Oh,
that I was Henry. Yeah.
Well, look. At one point, I would love to go to one of these things, and I'll tee into the next question. Why was Henry not there? Look, I've got a young family. I put that first before everything, and frankly, it just didn't work out. I don't think it's going to be something that could work out in the near future. I would love for it to, but between work, between the channel stuff, and between wanting to spend more time with my kids and my wife, it's unfortunately not on the priority list. At one point, hopefully so.
You could make brutality in Houston. Do Houston brutality. It would just be
actually trademarked right now, so we can't call it brutality.
Oh, yeah.
So we have a Super Chats question. What is the most reliable brand of ammunition in the cold? I can talk about my experience.
Go ahead, because I don't really have.
The most reliable brand of ammunition in the cold is a non-branded Soviet ammunition.
Oh, okay.
I mean, corrosive primers with very well-sealed steel case ammunition that's in a tin can. Probably some of the best. I mean, they did not mess around with the sealing on that type of stuff. That being said, American general military ammunition is really, really good, I would say, because the difference, there's a huge difference between commercial and military ammunition. Military ammunition has a lot more into the specs that they place in there that commercial ammunition just doesn't have, like the crimping, the sealing, the types of primer components, the flash retardants, not really for reliability, it's more for combat use. But the projectile selection, the cannelure, a lot of that on the military side, there is a much larger focus towards reliability than there is towards consistency and precision. And consistency and precision is more of a sporting thing. I'm not saying that M118 LR is not consistent. It's not as consistent as some sporting civilian ammunition, but that's because they favor something else on reliability. So can you have both? Of course you can. But it's just not one of those things dictated in like a military contract or a Soviet state military arsenal. But the question here is most reliable, so I will answer with most reliable. Lake City, agreed. Lake City is fantastic. If it is not the reject stuff, so I'll leave that to you guys to figure out what's reject, Lake City or not. All right, so Blitz here. Rook said, what outcome do you value more from a competition? Walking away feeling reassured that the skills you have, or walking away feeling like you've got more work to do in particular skills? Any striking examples of either experience? While seeking both is a perfectly reasonable expectation, it's a less interesting answer, so you must choose one. So do you want to walk away feeling reassured that your skill is great, or walk away feeling that you need to do more work when you go to a competition?
I mean, I'm naturally a competitive person. I never like feeling reassured, regardless of my performance. There's always something that I want to work on, get better at. And usually for me, when it is a rifle competition, what I feel like I need to leave with is better positional skills with a rifle. And it's not like I don't know how to get into various positions. It's the speed at which I do it. If you watch like the really good rifle shooters, they can go from a full sprint to a stop to like a kneeling behind a strange barricade and start shooting immediately. I have to find my my footing and like where do I place my elbow on my knee, like what, and it takes an extra second or two compared to like someone who's done it every possible way.
I think that's one thing that's consistent a lot across the board. Most of shooting, so much of shooting comes down to positions and how you control the core of your body instead of just the firearm itself, because that's a foundation to it. It's the same thing with precision shooting. If you look at some of the top competitors on PRS side, it comes down to how quickly can they get into a stable position, keep it, and then apply fundamentals. Same thing if you look at like Ben Steger, if he's like running matches, that dude could be like hanging all the way back and clock like A zones at 25 faster than you can at 15.
Or 5 for most people.
Or yeah. 5, yeah. So,
but yeah, I mean, it is comfortable feeling that you get to test your skills and see that you're competent under certain conditions. Like, I guess like one thing is like malfunction clearances. If you watch someone who's very new to shooting, they have a malfunction, they completely freeze and don't know what to do. For any experienced shooter, we just kind of problem solve, immediately. But I don't go like, oh yeah, I cleared that malfunction, great, I'm good to go. I don't need to practice anything else anymore. That's not how I look at shooting.
So, next question: if you could have swapped your firearm / loadout choice for another competitor's choice, what would it have been and why?
I would have swapped that with Bloke, just because I've never fired an SA-80. Yeah, not because it's better. I mean, his gun did work better than mine. His ammo, like, it's not sensitive to, or his ammo wasn't garbage. But yeah, I just want to see what it's like to shoot that thing. I mean, it seems like it works so much better than the internet gives it credit.
I mean, it's kind of. I mean, I'm a part of that crowd that use it as a punching bag, but it's turned into the internet's punching bag, right? It's sort of the opposite of the M14. Like the M14 was brought up so much, but at least, but then still, I would still say not a lot of people had access to the M14 itself, and the ones they did have access to weren't true M14s. So you couldn't even say, you could still fall back on saying, oh, that's not a true military M14. Military M14s are good.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that nobody has access to an actual SA-80 outside of people like Mike. And so that turns into a punching bag for everyone to punch at the SA-80 and saying it's not reliable. Some of it is well earned. But again, that's not, we don't know that for a fact because
I mean,
used it.
His does look mint condition. Like, I'm assuming if it was ever fired before him, it wasn't much.
Look, everything about the operating system of the SA-80, it says it's a proven I mean, it's the AR-180 operating system. It's a good operating system. It's just like the stuff that goes on top of it that were questionable at best. One thing I was going to say, talking to Mike, he told me that he had an issue, and Josh has had this issue in the past, on the high power on the side. You know how it's got the slide lock bar? He kept on bumping. He kept on bumping in front of the slide lock bar, and he would lock his slide for no reason. And that annoyed him. And he said, if I were to shoot it single hand or teacup, not an issue. But that's not how people shoot nowadays, and that's not how he's used to shooting. So he keeps on bumping the slide. So it seems like the high power, the BHP, is very incompatible with modern shooting styles. With Josh,
it depends how big your hands are too,
especially if you're wearing gloves.
Yeah, especially with gloves. But when I shoot a high power, I can usually keep my I had that problem the first time I shot it, and now I hold the gun lower, which I kind of hold most guns lower now than the internet tells me you're supposed to, and that keeps your thumbs away from all the controls.
Snake has been very, very mouthy during this session. He evidently says that Britbong ammunition is piss weak too. I don't know. I don't have any Radway Green 5.56. I do have some Radway Green 7.62 I could test actually, and I do need to test it in my L1A1. So, thank you for that reminder. Let's see. It is a sample of one of the SAAT. So we don't have.
I know of two that work.
Yeah, so we don't have a fleet of SAATs to really test out. And then there's also a huge difference between like an SAAT A1, A2, and A3. You know, there have been generational updates to the system itself. What's interesting is that Mike's SAAT is a Gen 1 original SAAT, which is that's an artifact that's extremely difficult to get.
Yeah.
So now let me ask you this. If you could have swapped your firearm / loadout with another competitor's choice, not based on drippiness, what would you use? Let's say not even competitor's choice. Let's just say anything out there. Let's say the most ideal thing for an environment like this, knowing what you know now. What else would you have used?
If the conditions were identical to last time, I'd use some kind of lightweight AR for the rifle. And for a pistol, I'd probably use like a racier CZ variant. Just because my personal preference, I like CZs or CZ style guns.
And so if I got to throw anything out there on your personal collection, anything that was on the drippy side that you would bring, would there be anything that you would want to shoot in the competition like this?
I would love to have tried my HK93 to see how that does. Because we don't really have a whole lot of information on those guns being used in the cold.
Yeah, I mean, I know the Norwegians use the both the Norwegians and the Swedes use G3s in the cold.
Yeah, but we don't really hear much about the 5.56s. It's all Southeast Asian countries that use them.
Yeah, that's true.
Thailand, Malaysia.
That would be interesting. But you also you have the slide. You have the forward assist on the side. On the 93s.
That's true. Yeah, the little divot. You should put your thumb on. Yeah.
All right. Let me see. So, last question from the patron side, and for the audience out there, we're near the end. So if you do have any questions, drop it in now so we can get to it. Of all the rifles and pistols you've seen at Finnish Brutality so far, which was the least reliable in the Finnish winter, and which was a runner-up? Let's just say the 3 to 5 worst rifles you've seen perform at Finnish Brutality, whether it's winter or normal.
Oh man, just off the top of my head, the worst I remember might be Giga's Saiga 308, but he bubbled it, so.
He massively messed with the gassing on that thing, though.
Yeah,
and he still so this is he won that year with a
he did. He won with a halfway working bubbled AK 308 Saiga 308.
Why is that? Like, is the shooting just not really competitive for the score, or
it varies from year to year, and each year the shooting has gotten more difficult. If he brought that same rifle to last year's Finnish Brutality, 2024, like he would have been toast. The competition has gotten so much harder on the marksmanship side. Okay,
all right. So a bubbled up Saiga 308 that was on the verge of cycling. One.
Yeah. What else was garbage tier? I mean, most people want to bring stuff that works.
You've had some experiences with things that don't work, though.
But it's never the gun. It's usually some weird combination of ammo with the gun, like this Gecko uncrimped ammunition.
All right, let's put ourselves in this situation. You are the Minister of Defense of Albonia, and you are sending military aid to the Finnish Defense Force, who have exhausted their entire stock of fighting rifles, and are at the verge of being captured by the Russians.
Okay.
as the Albanian Minister of Defense and people out there, the Albanian Minister of Defense, Albania typically chooses the worst military rifles that sound good on the other end. What would you choose, Calvin?
What would be a bad rifle that sounds good? That is tough. Because, like, what would...
Topper
I don't know.
Topper Harley is saying send
Send
in
that.
the SKS. I'm not sure if that's the worst though,
I mean,
because at least I think that would work in the Finnish cold.
yeah. I think
It
what
would
would
have to
not
be.
work?
It would have to be like a riced out JP 3-gun rifle. Like send a giant crate of it,
Oh, if we're getting to those kind of guns, I mean, yeah, I guess
right?
like
I mean, anything that favors performance over pure performance over reliability, I think would be the worst.
yeah. Any hyper tuned AR would probably be terrible.
Um, knowing your issue with the no, knowing your issue with the Hungarian contract Gecko 76239, I wonder how it would have gone if you used like a CZ600 trail or one of the bolt actions.
I have no experience with that gun at all. I've seen them. That's about as much. Oh, Insas.
The INSAS would be so we just had a
Yeah.
comment from Solid Snake again about the INSAS. That's
Yeah.
probably a pretty terrible example to issue the Finnish Defense Forces. On the contrary of this, I actually don't think the Mosin Nagant would be the worst thing, because the Finns actually use the Mosin Nagant.
Yeah, they use them quite a bit to a decent amount of success, especially one particular person.
Yes. Oh, speaking of that, I do think it was interesting when we were talking about the optics side. Did any optics fog up with moisture?
I didn't see any of that. No one.
I
I didn't
know.
hear anyone complain about it.
So that was one of the that was a chief reason why SEMO used iron sights, is the lack of reliability and the vulnerability of being spotted using a telescopic optic from that era.
Yeah, but also the optics they had access to in Finland of that era are not as good as our Timu optics.
This Kasuli man, which is clearly a Finnish man, says,
Yeah.
Jokes on you, we are into that shit," which he's referring to the Mosin Nagant, of course. Yeah. So very much I think the Mosin Nagant is in the category of this will perform in a Finnish winter location. Throwing back on the example of the Germans on the Eastern Front, they did actually run into that issue with the 98Ks. The 98Ks, because they were action-wise, it's tighter fit than the Mosin Nagant, and also they use a wrong lubricant that became a lot. It was a lot less viscous, and it froze onto the action. So my thought on this too, the 98K caulking handle being bent is also difficult to impart leverage onto. So between having less, so the Arctic Warfare, the sniper rifle, the Swedish enhanced British sniper rifle, the Accuracy International Arctic Warfare, it had the extra cuts on the bolt specifically to break ice. I feel like the Mosin Nagant specifically has a lot of these little nooks and crannies for ice to break into. It has that straight angle bolt handle to really throw leverage onto if you need to. And on top of that, if you're just running it dry, I think that combination itself seems to be a much more useful and harder to freeze up action than the 98K action was back then, which is historically what was documented on the Eastern Front. So I think the Mosin Nagant is most certainly something worthwhile to keep on the freezing east. Anyways, let me look through. Just quickly look through.
Well, actually, someone mentioned East German AKs. That reminds me of the Albonia question. This is real life, but the Finns did purchase a bunch of Chinese AKs to have in reserves, and they bought the El Cheapo ones that were not the good ones, like we saw in certain contracts, like in Africa and stuff. And then more recently, they bought a bunch of South Korean AKs for their Reserve Training Association thing, and those also did not work. And they're supposed to be replaced by ARs from the same company, which are supposed to
Oh
work.
no!
But I
Oh,
think that didn't
no.
work out, and this is why they had their new Sako thing. So yeah, the Albonia thing was real with Finland.
Well, it's real with a lot of bureaucrats, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I say that half laughingly, having experienced some fun things along those lines. But so to expand on that, what Calvin's talking about, buying Chinese AKs is like saying you're buying Chinese electronics. It could go from your iPhone all the way to like an Olight that would self-explode in your pocket. There's a huge spectrum of it. It all comes down to what kind of contract you're speccing out and what type of QC you're putting into the contract upon receiving. Africa does not do that, and they have a very low dollar amount that they put towards these contracts. In the 80s, the Norinkos and Polytechs that came into America were some of the best ones because they were these Chinese guys running these import companies based in America, who knew how to speak, who knew how to draft contracts in Chinese, who knew the people who were working in these factories in China, who knew which factories were using the best materials and knew the systems themselves. And they would bring in some of the best Chinese weapon systems, some of the best Chinese clones into America. So a lot of it, that's the reason, there's a reason why a lot of people in the international market look at the Chinese weapon systems and are like, this is, it's just a crappy Chinese product. And then you get Americans who are used to the American 1980s imports, and they think that the Chinese are very misunderstood. Both sides are right. What Calvin's talking about, unfortunately, is the Africa contract end of the Chinese AKs being sold to Finland. So it's not just Finland who receives some of these contracts, by the way, in Europe. It's more than them. I'll just leave it at that. Let's see. Are there any more?
I don't see anything else. Oh, this is kind of a sore subject. Not literally.
Did you consider bringing any RK62s back in your prison wallet?
As of right now,
Calvin tried to import RKs.
I didn't try that hard, but basically ATF no likey. Some other guy tried really hard to make a single shot, no magazine RK, and the ATF also said no. And they took his sample and broke out the welded portion over the magwell and said, "Look, it can now accept magazines," because he put a block in there and welded the magwell shut. And even the ATF was like, "Nope." They did everything they could to make it not happen.
Yeah, clearly he just didn't know how big of a cup of coffee to buy the ATF agent.
Yeah.
On that, I do think one thing that just came to mind with the magazine side, I think a lot of times small things, as we close out, I think small things towards weapon designs that we should, instead of dismissing it right away, let's look at Rock and Lock magazines. It seems to get a lot of hate in America. Yes, it's a little bit more cumbersome than pressing your button and having the magazine fall out. But Rock and Lock magazines are actually a fairly foolproof style of magazine to put into a weapon system when you're talking about something that could go through mud, sand, and snow. Because you have that hook and a leverage point in applying the force, you are able to positively lock that magazine in, whereas like with a Stenag mag, you'd be banging the base of it until Kingdom Come. I guess one way to get around that is the H&K system, where you completely lock the entire system back and put the magazine in and slap the charging handle closed. But when you start looking at these things outside of what is peak performance for the fastest split to show on Instagram or the smallest grouping you could produce, but you start looking at things from a more practical utilitarian perspective, you start seeing that some of these weapon designs have little nuggets of interesting things that, you know, some of these design concepts were trying to they were trying to solve problems that a lot of people who only chase after what matters to the you know, peak precision or peak recoil control market sort of neglect. And there's a lot to weapon use that goes outside of just that. And the biggest thing, in my opinion, that rifles and pistols, firearms in general, should do is be reliable and work. That's the primary thing, in my opinion. Of course, if you can get good accuracy, if you can get good recoil characteristics, even better. But I think this is sort of like the tip of an iceberg and a part of a long-standing conversation that you and I have had. I mean, for years at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you pretty much, is it hit it on the head? Oh, hit the nail on the head? Is that the expression?
Hit the firing pin onto the primer right there.
Yeah. No, I mean, having worked in the firearms retail side, I do see people prioritize things that a little bit different than how I would prioritize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate because a lot of times our perceptions here in America nowadays are driven by, it's not industry driven, it's not government driven. I mean, I'm not saying that it has to be that, but it's driven by it's driven by social media. It's driven by, you know, what looks cool, what sounds cool, and marketing is able to manipulate a lot of those things. And I just hope people have a better. I hope people are able to decipher some of those marketing cues a little better and look beyond what marketing is trying to say, and kind of try to peel back the onion on design characteristics a little more for what something is designed to do. Anything else that you would like to anything else you would like to add?
I don't think so. I think we're pretty good.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, huge thanks for you guys sticking around out there. I know we kind of like rambled on quite a bit more, but if you guys have anything that you guys want to see in the future, feel free to drop it in the comment section right here. But Calvin, I'm looking forward to doing more content with you if we are able to. For now, though, you'll see you guys on the range.
716 is Steel Knight 6, 4 Vic, 8 packs, Redcon 1, green to green. How copy, over?
Steel Knight 6, this is 716, roger, over. 16, Steel Knight 1, 1 pack, green, green, over. This is 716, roger, over.
So much for
I'm trying to end.
716 is Steel Knight 6, 4 Vic, 8 packs, Redcon 1, green to green. How copy, over?
Steel Knight 6, this is 716, roger, over. 16, Steel Knight 1, 1 pack,